Hey there folks, this is Peter Skov for Music is a Journey. We're starting another video here taking a look at the albums ranked of a particular band. As you know, if you've seen my other ranking videos and other ranking lists, these are not my personal ranks. The way I do it is I check out how other people have ranked them and I do a compilation, a collection of ranking lists, and then I score them all up and find what the average rank is for each album out there. And today, of course, we're going to be taking a look at the albums of Black Sabbath. The reason why this is coming up now, quite simply, it's February. Black Sabbath's debut album was released in February 1970, and I am going to do a video on the first 10 albums of Black Sabbath as part of my first 10 albums of a band series. However, as I was checking out information about the albums, I kind of got curious about the rankings, and I started watching some ranking videos to find out about some of the albums that I don't have, which are some of the later ones. So anyway, I just started doing that, and for my ranking videos, I like to find a good chunk of lists. So if possible, I try to go for 10 or maybe a dozen lists, unless there aren't that many available. But in the case of Black Sabbath, there were so many ranking lists available. So first what I did was to check the internet, and I checked various websites that had ranked the albums. And then after that I went to YouTube and I found there were just so many videos on different channels ranking the albums of Black Sabbath. So here are the lists that I checked. I'm going to check my high-tech device here. I'm still very much a scrap paper type of person. So I checked lists on The Guardian, Kerrang! Magazine, Rolling Stone's Reader's Poll for the top 10 albums, Ultimate Classic Rock, Louder Sound, Far Out Magazine, I think I might have checked them once before for something, Loudwire, and then from YouTube, Sea of Tranquility. I always like listening to Pete Pardo's ranking lists. A channel called Ruthless Metal, Classic Album Review. Recently I've really been enjoying watching his videos. He's very articulate. And let's see here, there were a couple that I was going to watch, but it turned out those videos were actually 3 or 4 people, each giving their own ranking, and I just thought that was starting to get a little bit overboard. So I stuck with one fella at DK Media Music, and then finally, And Justice for Earl. So that gave me a total of 12 lists, and of those 12 lists, the Rolling Stone Reader's Poll one was just the first top 10 albums on the list. So here's the thing. Basically 12 lists, and 10 of those albums appear on all 12 lists. So I totaled up their ranks and divided by 12. And then for the other 9 albums, there are 19 albums in total that we're looking at here, I totaled up their total and divided by 11 to find out what their average rank was. Now there's one other thing to mention, that there is an album here called Heaven and Hell. You probably know about it. This was basically Black Sabbath with Ronnie James Dio for the 3rd time. And they had to call it Heaven and Hell because Black Sabbath had officially regrouped with Ozzy Osbourne. At the time, they were basically a touring band. However, they couldn't go ahead and team up with Ronnie James Dio and make a Black Sabbath album. That wouldn't work. So they came up with the idea of calling it Heaven and Hell. Now, when I was checking the ranking lists, I was wondering if this would be included or not. And the first few lists I checked did not include it. So I decided, okay, I'm not going to include it either, since it is, I don't know, is it a Black Sabbath album or it isn't? You know, it's kind of like with Yes, with the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe album. It's not a Yes album, even though the 4 members are formerly of Yes at the time of that release. But anyway, some people call it a Yes album, some people don't. Anyway, I decided to leave it off, and in the end, it appeared, out of the 12 lists, it probably appeared on about half of them. So some people did actually include it on the list of Black Sabbath albums. It's a really cool album anyway, but it's going to be off the list for this ranking session. We're going with the 19 studio albums that are actually labeled as Black Sabbath. Even though some of them, this album here sounds more like Black Sabbath than some of the ones we're looking at. But anyway, let's get started here. Starting with rank number 19. Was it 1995, 96? I forgot now, but anyway. Forbidden. Okay, this one here scored an average of 18.7. which puts it pretty consistently near bottom place almost every time. In fact, out of 11 lists, it was 19th place on 9 of them. It was 18th place on 1, and it was 17th place on 1. This album here is kind of a disaster. Earlier this evening, I did kind of check out a few of the songs, and yeah, it does have the Iommi riffs that we would come to expect, but the vocals, to me, I just thought that this sounds like a Sabbath cover band trying to write original songs, and not even an experienced cover band. It was pretty disappointing, actually. And, you know, I'd actually thought, you know, hey, it's Black Sabbath, how bad can it be? I might still want to get it, but no, I've decided I don't need to go down that road. That's quite all right. It was an album where Cozy Powell and, was it Neil Murray who were in on the rhythm section? And both of them had other obligations at the time, so they weren't really part of the writing process. And they also had Ice-T. Ice-T? Was it Ice-T or Ice Cube? I forget now. One of the Ice Boys, anyway, came in to do a bit with the album. And Tony Iommi said that he just wasn't really as involved in the whole production process, and he regrets that. Anyway, end result is that that album pretty much gets pooped on by almost everyone ranking Black Sabbath albums. So 18th place goes to 86, released early 1986, the album Seventh Star, Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi. This was the album that was originally supposed to be a Tony Iommi solo project. After Born Again, Black Sabbath had basically kind of splintered and was kind of in a bit of a mess at the time. Tony Iommi teamed up with Glenn Hughes to do a solo album. He got in Dave Spitz on bass, Eric Singer on drums, and Jeff Nichols on keyboards. Now, Jeff Nichols had actually been doing the keyboards for Black Sabbath albums since the mid-70s, you know, and he actually became a regular member of Black Sabbath in 1986. But anyway, that was the band he put together for his solo project. The album, of course, does have the Iommi guitar playing, that distinguished sound of his. However, there was a slightly different texture to it than what we were used to with Black Sabbath, certainly after the high-energy Born Again album and the two Dio albums. So this one here gets ranked pretty low on the list. I mean, it was just the record company and the manager who decided that it should be released as a Black Sabbath album. So anyway, that is Seventh Star in 18th place with an average rank of 16. Just checking here, it actually had 4 16th place rankings. Its lowest ranking was 19. Its highest ranking was 10. Okay, coming in 17th place is, oh, I actually have this one, Cross Purposes. It has an average of 14.5. The reason why I have it is because I watched ranking the albums of Black Sabbath video maybe a year or two back, and I thought I remember somebody saying that Cross Purposes was actually pretty good. Certainly better than Forbidden. And so I thought, well, okay, let's hear what one of these later Black Sabbath albums sound like, and I managed to track a copy down on Discogs, and I listened to it and went, yeah, okay. And I think I only listened to it once. I haven't listened to it again. So probably I'll have to listen to it again. But anyway, it turns out that it was not Cross Purposes, but Headless Cross that people were saying was actually a pretty good album. So I went and got the wrong one. But anyway, here it is. So let's see here. Cross Purposes. It had the Far Out magazine actually gave it an 8th place ranking. And mostly it fell into 12 to 18 on other people's lists. Anything else to say about Cross Purposes? Let's see here. We've got Tony Martin on vocals. Where have I written this down here? Of course, we've got Iommi and Butler, Tony Iommi, Terry Butler, Geezer. We've got Jeff Nichols doing keyboards. And who do we have on drums? Bobby Rondinelli is actually on drums on this. Bobby Rondinelli, who played with Blue Oyster Cult, Rainbow, Quiet Riot, and in our first 10 albums of the Scorpions, we mentioned that he had actually been part of the original sessions for the Love at First Sting album. Why, I don't know, but yeah, he was. Okay, so there's Cross Purposes in 17th place. Moving on, 16th place, Eternal Idol with an average rank of 14. Actually, I think it was 13.9. Most of the rankings put it between 14th and 16th place. It had one number 9 ranking, which was on Ultimate Classic Rock. I remember Sea of Tranquility's Pete Pardo. He had it pretty somewhere in the middle or lower middle of his list, but he actually said it was not a bad album. It was pretty good. I had it on cassette in the 80s, and I don't remember a thing about it. So earlier this evening, I was just skipping through some of the songs on YouTube, just checking them out, see if they rang any bells. No. I don't remember a thing about that album. Just listening to the songs on YouTube now, I thought, yeah, Black Sabbath were really trying to reinvent their sound for the 80s, and it's quite different from their, you know, their classic sound of the early 70s, or even their 2 albums with Dio. They were really, I guess it was Tony Iommi basically, was really trying to put the band, make them relevant for the metal scene of the 80s. Okay, Eternal Idol. Then in 15th place, also around the same time, we have, how do you pronounce that? Is it Tyr? Tyr? T-Y-R? Anyway, 37.7. Let's see here. Ruthless Metal. The YouTube channel Ruthless Metal actually gave it a ranking of number 3. And there was another YouTube reviewer who said that Tyr was actually his favorite album of the 80s, post-Dio. Let's see here, we also had it basically in 15th to 18th place mostly. And who's on the album? Neil Murray plays bass. I guess he was, after he left Whitesnake, he had other things to do. And the others were the same as the previous album, which is Headless Cross, which actually had, let's see here, Cozy Powell on drums? Oh, Neil Murray and Cozy Powell. Oh, okay. Well, that's kind of cool. Anyway, so Tyr is 15th place. I listened to a few of the tracks on YouTube tonight. And some of my impressions were, hey, that's actually not so bad. I might want to try to get this album. And then other ones, it was like, man, are there ever a lot of keyboards on here? Which actually, a lot of these late 80s Black Sabbath albums, there are some tracks that I think sound good. Yeah, that fits the Sabbath catalog quite nicely. And there are other tracks I think, okay, Sabbath, they're really trying to do something, you know, to sound like a late 80s metal band. And I just thought the emphasis on keyboards was a little bit more than what I would have expected from Black Sabbath. But anyway, everybody, you know, those late 80s, early 90s albums, some of them are pretty hard to get now because of their lack of popularity. But let's see here, in 14th, rank number 14 goes to Born Again. Oh, hey, I've got that. There we go, Born Again. Let's see here, 13.2, with DK Music Media giving this a 19th place. Bottom of the list from that guy. He says he just really can't stand all the Ian Gillan shrieks, especially on Disturbing the Priest, where he really goes out of his way to do that. This album, it's really split. Some people will say actually the songs or the music is really good, and the idea of having Gillan singing with Black Sabbath sounded like it should have been a good idea. But the big complaint about this, I remember back in the day, was the production. Even I thought so. I just thought there was something in the production that was just not bringing out the meat in the songs. You know, the riffs were heavy, the music was powerful, Ian Gillan's vocals were powerful, but there was something lacking there. Anyway, in looking back now, a lot of people actually seem to think about this album a little more favorably, and it is in 14th place. So that means that there are another 5 albums that are worse than this one. And probably just one reason why it's in 14th and not a notch higher is because that one guy gave it a 19. Do I have a highest position? The highest positions, actually, one list gave it a 7th place and one list gave it an 8th place. Let's take a look at 13th place. The rank number 13 goes to 1978's Never Say Die, the final album of the classic 70s lineup, the founding members, Never Say Die here. Last album with Ozzy Osbourne for a very long time. There we go. Let's see here. Never Say Die basically fell in the 12th to 15th place rankings. We had two of them ranking it at 18, almost at the very bottom. Three ranks actually put it at 10, and one rank gave it a 9. So it's generally an album that is considered not all that favorably, particularly among the classic albums of Black Sabbath during the 1970s. Of course, this is the album where, you know, Ozzy Osbourne's drug and drink problems were just basically getting way out of hand. I mean, if they weren't already way out of hand from the beginning. This album here, we had some, you know, more keyboards coming in, thanks Jeff Nichols. We had, let's see, there was a brass stuff coming in here. What I write for Never Say Die, Don Airey, actually. Sorry, Don Airey is the one doing the keyboards on here, not Jeff Nichols. Will Malone doing brass arrangements. Yeah, it is Black Sabbath trying to stay relevant in 1978 when basically all the bands from the early 70s were being considered dinosaurs amidst the new virile punk rock generation. But yeah, you'll still find people saying there are some good songs on here. I honestly did not listen to this album since sometime back in the 80s, and I only just got it on CD 2 days ago. So actually, I haven't listened to it yet. 12th place goes to the 1992 album Dehumanizer, which features Ronnie James Dio on vocals and Vinny Appice on drums. So the same lineup that gave us Mob Rules back in 1981. Dehumanizer had an average rank of 12.7. And let's see here, the high placing put it at number 6. DK Media Music on YouTube gave it, he's the one who gave it a 6. All right. And The Guardian put it in spot number 18. Wow. And they said that while it was a great idea to bring back Ronnie James Dio and Vinny Appice, they forgot to include any really good songs. All right. I actually only know one song from that album which showed up on a Dio compilation that I picked up well over a decade ago, and I haven't listened to that for a while either. But anyway, Dehumanizer actually is still available on CD for a normal price, so I might want to be checking that one out sometime. Okay, moving on. Slot number 11 goes to Technical Ecstasy. Yes, the average ranking of Technical Ecstasy, 12.6, is 0.1 ahead of Dehumanizer. Whatever you want to think about that. Let's see, it was the only 70s album that did not make Rolling Stone's Readers' Poll's top 10 albums of Black Sabbath. So, interestingly, it actually was on that poll lower than Never Say Die. This, I actually also just got this a couple of days ago, and I only listened to it for the first time today. Yeah, there are some cool rockin' songs on here. I like All Moving Parts Stand Still and Backstreet Kids. You Won't Change Me is interesting. It's All Right is Bill Ward singing. Now, it's not that he's all that bad a vocalist, and singing on one track on an album might not be such an unreasonable thing. However, listening to it, I felt as if Black Sabbath were saying, hey, look, Queen have Freddie Mercury, but they also have Brian May and Roger Taylor singing. So why don't we get one of our band members to sing as well? Who's it gonna be? Rock, scissors, paper. Bill, you lost because you were drunk and you didn't play properly anyway. I don't know. Anyway, it's alright, but you know, it's a piano ballad, and apparently for this album here, Black Sabbath were trying to move away from the doom and gloom of the early 70s sound and trying to make themselves a little bit more appealing, maybe to some people who wouldn't have liked them earlier on. The album is considered to be a fair bit of a disaster, and one of the problems was that they had so much problem on the previous album with their former manager and were basically dealing with lawyers throughout almost the whole recording of the previous album that for this one here, they just said the band is going to do it themselves, Tony Iommi will produce it. Whether that's good or not, I don't know, but yeah, it certainly is a little bit higher up the list from some of the other albums, coming in here at spot number 11. So there it is, Technical Ecstasy. I do actually find the artwork rather interesting. Album number 10. with an average rank of 11.8, is Black Sabbath's final studio album, 13. Yeah, I have the cover with the moving flames on it. I also have the double disc version, which includes 3 extra tracks, although there is another one available that actually has 4 extra tracks. Produced by Rick Rubin, this was supposed to be the final album with the classic lineup, but Bill Ward did not get his butt in on the drum stool, so they got Brad Wilk in drums for Rage Against the Machine, Audio Slave. I actually thought this was a pretty cool way for Black Sabbath to go out. And a lot of people have said, especially after the disaster that was Forbidden back in the mid-90s, it was good to have kind of this final way to wrap up Black Sabbath's studio album recording career. Having Ozzy Osbourne back in with Geezer and Tony. I actually thought it was also pretty cool that they kind of referenced themselves going back to the beginning. Like there are moments or bits and parts here and there that really remind you of those early days, especially where the final track concludes with the falling rain and the tolling bell and thunder. It's like that's how it all began, that's how it's ending, right? But I was reading I haven't listened to it for, again, probably about 10 years now. Oh, yeah, 10 years, right. It's 2013. But yeah, produced by Rick Rubin, but apparently this has one of those mastering problems where there's you know, some distortion in the music, or the main complaint is that the production is just not good. This could have sounded a lot better. So I'm going to have to listen to this one again here just to refresh my memory. Is it really that bad? I remember there were some pretty cool tracks on here. I think God is Dead is yeah, one of my favorites. Okay. Headless Cross. Number 9 position goes to Headless Cross with an average rank of 11. Again, this is an album I'd never heard before, but I did give it a bit of a peekaboo listen on YouTube tonight. Yeah, some of the tracks sounded pretty good. Again, though, it's that late 80s production sound with those big, bright, echoey drums and the keyboards filling out. I'm not so sure I'm going to really want to get that album or not, but maybe. So let's see here. Headless Cross, generally falling into the 11 to 14 ranking. Kerrang! Magazine gave it a number 7. Ruthless Metal placed it at 6. So thanks to those guys, it actually hit the top 10. I think had it not been for them, had I checked 2 other lists, maybe it wouldn't have made it there. Headless Cross, we have Tony Iommi, of course. We have Lawrence Cottle on bass. Not sure who he is. Jeff Nichols on keyboards, of course. Cozy Powell on drums. And it looks like Brian May does the first guitar solo on the track When Death Calls. Okay, I'm kind of curious now. Maybe I will have to check that one out. Okay, Headless Cross in number 9th place. Looking to spot number 8, we have Sabotage with an average ranking of 7.6, which is a big jump. Headless Cross in 8th place was an average of 11. Jumping up 1 to Sabotage, Headless Cross 9, average of 11. Sabotage 8, average of 7.6. So we are really, you know, showing the gap between the lower ranking albums and the higher ones. You know, there was like this steady climb until we hit up to Headless Cross, and then there's just this jump. So we're definitely looking at what people generally consider the cream of the crop here of Black Sabbath releases. Now, Sabotage wasn't altogether favorably ranked. It seemed to fall in the 6th to 9th place overall. I probably shouldn't talk at my lap when I'm saying this. Did I have anything shocking? No, actually, no. It basically, yeah, sat there somewhere between 6th and 9th place and a little bit down at 11. Let's see here. We have for Sabotage Will Malone doing the choir arrangements. He also did the brass arrangements on Never Say Die. And that's about it. This is I don't know, the album cover is, especially these tights. Wasn't it Bill Ward's wife's tights he was wearing too? Yeah. Anyway, this is of course the album that has Symptom of the Universe and Hole in the Sky, which are 2 absolute killer tracks. There are other tracks in here that people pick out as being really good, but basically this was a rather angry album because, as Tony Iommi said, this was the only album they ever recorded with lawyers in the studio because they were constantly having to fight against their former manager. And that's why the album was called Sabotage, because they felt that the album was being sabotaged at every corner. But there it is, Sabotage in number 8th place. Where am I putting this? And 7th position goes to 1981's Mob Rules, the second album with Ronnie James Dio on vocals and bringing in Vinny Appice on drums. This was my first Black Sabbath album, and the very first Black Sabbath I ever heard was Turn Up the Night. A friend of mine who had an older brother who got it first let me listen to it, and I thought, wow, that is really cool. In fact, because this was my first Black Sabbath album, I thought Ronnie James Dio was the vocalist of Black Sabbath. And so when I heard Rainbow in the Dark on the radio later on, I thought, wow, Black Sabbath are using keyboards now. What's going on? Also, a friend of mine told me that Ozzy Osbourne helped start Black Sabbath, which I just imagined meant that he introduced the guys and Ronnie James Dio and said, hey, there you go, start a band. But anyway, Black Sabbath, Mob Rules. I like this album. I like all of side 1, and I like most of side 2. It's just, you know, that's me. Some people don't like it so much. They really distinguish between Heaven and Hell, not that one, the album Heaven and Hell, and this one here. But I've always really enjoyed it. And Sign of the Southern Cross is one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs and one of my favorite Dio performances. Anything else to say about this? Mob Rules. Oh yeah, of course. The song, the title track Mob Rules, was included on the Heavy Metal soundtrack, the movie Heavy Metal. As well, E5150 also appeared in the movie, but not on the soundtrack. It's a scene where all these, like the green glowing metal ball falls into a volcano, and all this green lava comes out and engulfs this army of people who then get transformed into these like murderous mercenary, I don't know, killer type people anyway. And it's as they go in to attack the city of scientists and cultured people, as they change and march, they have E5150 playing, and then when they attack, it breaks into Mob Rules with that really cool guitar riff. Interesting thing, E5150 is supposed to spell out evil. So if you take E and Roman numeral 5, that's a V, and Roman numeral 1, that's an I, and then Roman numeral 50, that's an L, so that's EVIL, evil. I always thought it was kind of coincidental, though, that 5150 was the term that Edward Van Halen used that on his guitar, and apparently it was the police call code for a lunatic. Anyway, whatever. Okay, so yes, that is Mob Rules. I'm actually very glad to see it here in 7th place, with an average rank of 7.25. So 7.6 for Sabotage, 7.25 for Mob Rules. 6th place, we jump up a little bit again now, going to 5.1, going to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. I probably shouldn't talk about these first 10 albums too much in detail, because I'm going to do that in the next video. But anyway, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. This one here with Rick Wakeman doing an uncredited guest appearance while Yes were recording their Tales from Topographic Oceans, and Rick was getting kind of bored as they were working out some lengthy part that didn't include keyboards. He went to the studio nearby where Black Sabbath were recording, hung out, and did an unofficial guest appearance on the album. This is the 5th album. We have the track featuring orchestra coming in here. We have the classic title track with some really cool riffing. I think Spiral Architect was one of the ones I really liked, and Killing Yourself to Live I also really like. I think overall this is a really cool album. I will mention about the artwork, I think, in the next video, because I read some interesting stuff about that. But there you have it, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath in 6th place. 5th place with an average of 4.8 goes to the 1970 debut. What do you want to say about that? Of course, this is where it all starts. And with that opening track, Black Sabbath, the band did something that was You know, other bands were experimenting with darker and heavier sounds at the time, but that one just somehow really hits it on the head, I think. Is it where heavy metal actually started, really? It is definitely one of the top contenders, if not the top contender. But yeah, there's more to say about that in the next video. For now, Black Sabbath debut album ranks at number 5 with 4.8. It actually, yeah, basically fell into 5th and 7th place on most of the lists. So, spot number 4 goes to Volume 4 with an average of 4.6, just slightly ahead of the debut. This was my second Black Sabbath album, so now I found out Ozzy Osbourne actually did sing with the band originally. I got it just because it was one of the cheaper ones, so yeah, this has stuck with me since the beginning. It has always remained as one of the, one of my favorites. Wheels of Confusion is again one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs. An interesting album featuring the ballad Changes with just piano and vocals. FX, you know, after getting Mob Rules and then Volume 4 and then later on Born Again, I thought every Black Sabbath album includes a kind of FX track. Actually, it was just those 3, I think. Not sure about some of the other ones. But anyway, Volume 4 coming in at 4th place. Would you believe, you know there's one that we haven't mentioned yet, you're probably wondering when it's coming up here. But here it is in 3rd place, Heaven and Hell. The first album with Ronnie James Dio after the departure of Ozzy Osbourne. A lot of people missed Ozzy and wanted him to come back, but this really gave Black Sabbath a chance to reinvent their sound. A lot of the albums in the mid to latter half of the 70s, anyway, after maybe the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th albums basically struggled to find that sweet creative spot, and there were some decisions to try to do things that may or may not have been very successful, but with Dio in the band, and they just seemed to find a new way of writing music. They updated their sound and just came out with a killer album. This is one of the top ranked metal albums when I check, you know, lists for the top metal albums of all time, or just, you know, 80s or whatever. This album often shows up. So, you know, thank you, Dio, for all that you did for Black Sabbath. Really cool. I always loved the first 3 tracks. Those 3 I would include easily in a list of top Black Sabbath songs. Neon Nights, Children of the Sea, and oh, actually Lady Evil is the 3rd one here. No, Heaven and Hell. I had the cassette. Lady Evil appeared later on. But anyway, yeah, Neon Nights, Children of the Sea, Heaven and Hell. They are my picks for favorite songs from here, but I know other people pick some of the other tracks as well. Very cool album. Number 3. So number 2, well, you can probably guess what the last 2 are, but number 2 goes to Master of Reality, the 3rd album. The one featuring Sweet Leaf. I always find this is a really curious album because they say that this is the album that really kicked off stoner rock, stoner metal. Black Sabbath had already kicked off doom metal as well as standard heavy metal, traditional heavy metal. Now they were also kicking off stoner metal. But the interesting thing is that on this 8-track album, one is basically a ballad, 2 of them are short instrumentals of guitar only, so only 5 of the tracks are actually these, you know, heavy stoner metal type tracks. But it is a really standout album. More to say about that in the next video. But there it is, Master of Reality, coming in at spot number 2 with an average of 2.7. I realized I wrote down 2.7 twice, but the number 1 album is a little bit higher up from that. Master of Reality basically getting 8 number 2s out of the 12 lists. And it actually scored number 1 on one list, and the lowest rank on a list was number 7. Go figure. Master of Reality, number 7. Alright, so the number 1 position goes to 1970, the second album of 1970, Paranoid. Wow, there's so much to say about this one too. I guess I'll save that for the next video. Let's see here. It had 8 number 1 rankings, and the lowest ranking was number 6. Must have been the same list that gave Master Reality number 7. A big classic album. I actually had not listened to the whole album again since the 1980s when I had it on cassette. And I finally picked up the CD a couple of days ago and listened to it, and man, was it ever good to hear the whole album again. I have this Black Sabbath compilation back here, which basically has most of the tracks, but it didn't have Hand of Doom. And that was one of the songs I always really, really loved from this album, so it was so good to hear this again, Hand of Doom. Love it. But there you go, Paranoid in first place, actually with an average rank of 2.25. So there you go. Okay, now that is an average of 12 lists picked up over the internet ranking the albums of Black Sabbath. What do you think? You got your favorites, right? And the ones that you think should be at the bottom, right? Anyway, I am going to keep these out because I will try to get to my first 10 albums of Black Sabbath video over the weekend and hopefully get it up by the beginning of next week. So hopefully you will stick around to watch that one there. I will be introducing more background stories and notes and details behind the albums, as well as some information about the starting up of the band and the early part of the band history. So do stick around for that one if you want to know more about Black Sabbath, and hopefully I will be able to tell you something that you don't know. I have a ton of information from here, the special Mojo edition. I think this goes back to like 2004, 2005 or something. It is the story of Ozzy Osbourne's career, and of course the first good chunk of it is dedicated to Black Sabbath, including interviews with Geezer, Bill Ward, and Tony as well. So see what I can dig up there. Maybe there's something you don't know. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching this video. See you in a few days. Take care. Have a good weekend. Bye.